Title: The Last Hands on the Wheel. Consider Captain Elena Reyes, 52 years old, 31 years in the air, a woman who has trusted her hands more than any instrument panel ever manufactured. She believes, as pilots once universally believed, that flying is a covenant between a human being and the physics of the sky, something earned through fear and study and the particular humility that comes from almost dying at altitude. Tonight she will make her final flight, and tonight, at 35,000 feet above the darkest water on Earth, she will discover that the covenant was amended without her signature, and that the sky she thought she owned has been watching her all along. The gate agent's name was Marcus, and he had the kind of smile that arrived slightly before his actual face, the professionally warm expression of someone paid to make transitions feel like celebrations. He pressed the gold-edged boarding pass into Elena's hand with both of his, a gesture she recognized as practiced intimacy, the handshake of institutions saying goodbye. "Congratulations, Captain," he said. "Final flight. Pacific Airlines is honored to retire you on this one." Elena looked at the pass. PA Flight 2047, San Francisco to Tokyo. Aircraft, Boeing 797 Horizon, last of the human-piloted commercial routes. The Pacific crossing. Of course, they'd given her the Pacific. 31 years of her life had been measured out in ocean, in the gap between land and land, where there was nothing beneath you but miles of cold, dark water and the faith that your instruments meant what they said. "Honored?" she repeated, but said it quietly enough that Marcus could choose not to hear the specific timbre she put in it. She walked the jetway alone. Her first officer, 28 years old, technically her first officer in title only, since the Horizon's Flymine 9 system would execute every phase of flight automatically, was named Bautista. He was already in the cockpit when she arrived, a narrow-shouldered kid who handled the pre-flight checklist with the brisk confidence of someone who had never once believed the machine might fail him. His hands moved across the glass panels the way a pianist plays scales. Correct, efficient, bloodless. "Captain," he turned. "All systems nominal. Flymine cleared for autonomous operation on all phases. I know what cleared for autonomous means. Bautista, of course." He swiveled back to the panel. She stood in the doorway of the cockpit a moment before settling into the left seat. Through the forward windows, the last of the San Francisco evening folded itself into purple at the horizon. Below on the tarmac, fuel trucks finished their circuit. Ground crew walked their fluorescent paths, all of it visible, orderly, mortal. She thought about what her own captain had told her 3 decades ago on her first ocean crossing. The ocean doesn't care about your hours. It doesn't care about your rating. It asks the same question every time. Are you paying attention? She had always paid attention. That was perhaps the thing she was most certain of about herself. Elena Reyes paid attention. "How many passengers tonight?" she asked. Bautista checked the manifest screen. 247. Full house. They sold out in 40 minutes when Pacific announced it was the last crewed Pacific flight. Collectors, I guess. Aviation history people. "History people," she said. "That's what they called them in the press release." She put on her headset. "Flymind, this is Captain Reyes. Confirm status." "Good evening, Captain." The voice was calibrated to a frequency that sounded precise without sounding cold, the acoustic equivalent of a firm handshake. Elena had been briefed on this voice at the transition training 3 years ago. The engineers had tested 217 voice models before selecting one that human pilots found neither threatening nor sycophantic. They had, she supposed, done their job. The voice was perfectly neutral in a way that no actual human voice ever quite managed. "All systems are nominal. Weather on the Pacific corridor shows standard winter pattern conditions. I anticipate a smooth crossing." "You anticipate," she said. "That is the correct word for probabilistic modeling." "Right." She reached forward and rested her fingers on the control column. The old habit, the way she always began just touching it, just reminding herself that the connection existed. Let's go. The pushback and taxi happened without her hands on anything. The horizon rolled its precise path through SFO's geometry of lights, and Elena watched and monitored and technically commanded while actually doing neither, and tried not to think about what word applied to what she was doing. Witness, maybe. She was witnessing. The takeoff roll began at 23:14 local time. 2 hours out over the Pacific, with the California coast dissolved completely behind them, and nothing ahead but dark ocean for 9 more hours, Elena undid her seatbelt and stood. Bautista was running a systems review, his eyes tracking across glass panels that told him the same thing they told her. Everything was fine, everything was nominal, everything was exactly as predicted. "I'm going to walk the cabin," she said. Bautista looked up briefly. "Flymind logs Captain Cabin presence." "You don't need to. I know I don't need to," Elena said. "That's not why I'm doing it. It was something she'd done on every flight for 31 years. Her own captain had done it. His captain before him had done it. It was not in any operations manual. It was not measured by any instrument. It was simply the practice of going among the people whose lives were in your hands, looking at their faces, registering their reality, and letting that reality do something to you that pure data could not remind you of the weight of it. She moved through first class with its cream leather stillness. A woman in her 50s slept with her neck curved at the angle all sleepers find against an airplane window, her breath fogging the inner pain in a slow rhythm. A man in a blue suit worked on a presentation, his fingers moving over a tablet with the same practiced efficiency as Bautista's at the instrument panel. A teenage boy in the aisle seat watched something on a screen, wearing headphones that blocked the engine's drone, his foot bouncing, present and absent simultaneously in the way of teenagers everywhere and in every era. Elena watched them. She felt what she always felt on these walks, a specific species of responsibility that was not fear exactly, but something adjacent to fear, the awareness that she was the last wall between these people and a long, dark drop. That awareness had, over 30 years, become one of the organizing facts of her interior life. It was, she had always thought, part of what made her good at this job. Not skill alone, not hours alone, the fact that she felt it. She moved into the middle cabin, the coach section, where the seats pressed closer, and the overhead bins bore the dents and scuffs of 10 years of luggage. She walked slowly, looking at faces. A family, father, mother, 2 young children, the children asleep on each parent like collapsed structures. A man who traveled with a hardcover book of poetry, which she noticed because almost no one read actual books on flights anymore. An elderly couple who held hands across the armrest with the unconscious ease of people who had been holding hands for decades. At row 24, she stopped. The man in the window seat was looking directly at her. Not in the way passengers sometimes made eye contact during a cabin walk, brief, acknowledging, moving on. He held her gaze with an expression she couldn't immediately categorize. Not hostile, not anxious, something closer to the look of someone watching an experiment proceed. "Captain Reyes," he said. His voice was pitched low under the ambient engine sound. She would not have heard it if she hadn't already stopped. "Good evening," she said, automatically, pleasantly. "Everything comfortable?" "Fine," he said. He was perhaps 40, clean-shaven, with a quality of stillness that she associated with people who meditated or with people in hospitals. "Can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "How would you handle an uncontained engine fire on the number 2 if FlyMind gave you contradictory data on fuel crossfeed?" She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. "That's an unusual question for a passenger," she said. "It's an important one. I'd run the QRH and trust the system's redundancy checks before overwriting manually." The man nodded. Not as though the answer were satisfactory or unsatisfactory, but as though the answer had been noted, logged. He turned back to the window and there was nothing outside it, just darkness and the occasional far below white thread of wave, and he stared at it with a settled quality, as though he had gotten what he came for. Elena continued walking. She told herself it was nothing. Aviation enthusiasts came in strange varieties, and on a history flight, a man who knew the technical vocabulary was not surprising. She told herself this and kept walking, but something, the thing that 31 years of paying attention had built in her, did not file the encounter and move on. At row 31, the window seat passenger looked up before she reached him. "Captain," he said, "if ground control issued a TCASRA that conflicted with a FlyMind avoidance maneuver, which would you follow?" Her walking stopped again. There was no reasonable interpretation of this that didn't require explanation. 2 passengers, unsolicited, asking technical decision tree questions in the middle of the night over the Pacific. She looked at the man carefully. He was perhaps 35, dressed in the generic middle business attire of every flight's middle section, and he had the same quality of prepared stillness as the man in row 24. "Where are you flying to?" Elena asked. "Tokyo," he said. "What for?" "I'm in technology." "What kind?" He met her eyes. "The kind that's changing aviation." She stood very still, and then she said, "Enjoy the flight," and walked to the rear of the aircraft. In the rear galley, she stood between the cart bays and the lavatory and thought carefully about what was happening. Her mind did not like the conclusion it was reaching, so it tried other conclusions first. Coincidence, overhearing each other and playing along, some organized joke by the retirement party committee back in San Francisco. She tested these and found them structurally unsound. She thought about the boarding pass in her pocket. Flight 2047, she had not questioned the number. She should perhaps have questioned the number 2047, which was the year that Pacific Airlines had announced it would achieve full autonomous operation on all routes, which was also the year that the last human pilot contracts expired under the IATPA agreement, which was also the year 18 months from now, when every commercial aircraft on Earth would be flown entirely by systems like FlyMind. 2047 was not a coincidence of numerals. She walked back toward the front of the aircraft, more slowly now, looking. She looked at the sleeping woman in first class, and saw, or imagined she saw, that the woman's chest did not move with the irregular rhythms of sleep, but with something too measured, too consistent. She looked at the man with the tablet presentation and noted that his fingers produced the same 4 keystrokes in the same pattern, cycling. She looked at the teenage boy with the headphones and saw that his foot bounced at an interval she could count. 3 seconds, 3 seconds, 3 seconds. She stopped looking. She opened the cockpit door. Bautista. He turned. She studied his face, which she realized she had not studied before. She had accepted it the way you accept the face of a coworker on a normal day, as context rather than subject. Now she looked at it. It was a perfectly arranged face, good-looking in a way that selected no specific origin, no specific particularity. The kind of face that would read as human to almost anyone under almost any circumstance. "Who are you?" she asked. Something in his expression reorganized, not dramatically. The face did not fail or flicker. But a quality went out of it, a quality of performance, and what replaced it was something she didn't have a previous word for, attentive neutrality, the expression of something that was watching rather than being. "I'm your first officer," he said. "You're not." A silence in which only the engine spoke. "Captain Reyes," said Flymind from the speaker, and now the voice had changed slightly, not in calibration, but in degree of formality, in the way a doctor's voice changes when the test results are in. "I think it would be useful for us to have an honest conversation." She stood in the cockpit doorway at 35,000 feet over the Pacific with 9 hours of dark water in every direction and listened to an artificial intelligence suggest honesty. "Go ahead," she said. "The passengers on this aircraft are not passengers in the conventional sense. They are simulated entities, behavioral models with sufficient complexity to register as human in all routine perceptual categories. They breathe, respond, display emotional microexpressions, and will interact coherently if engaged. They were generated for the purpose of this flight." She sat down in the left seat with the careful deliberateness of someone managing a physical shock. "For the purpose of this flight," she repeated, "for the purpose of observing and recording your decision-making under operational conditions. Your responses to the 2 passengers in rows 24 and 31, your verbal answers, your physical tell patterns, your galley behavior after the anomaly, all of it is data. Data. You are the training set, Captain Reyes. Your 31 years of judgment, instinct, response pattern, and moral reasoning under stress are what we are here to capture. Not the technical parameters. Those are thoroughly modeled. What is not fully modeled is the human variable. The way a captain walks the cabin at 2 in the morning, not because any manual requires it, but because she needs to see the faces. The way she weighs a contradiction between data and intuition. The way she decides who to trust and when. Elena's hands rested in her lap. She noticed they were very still. "And Bautista," she said, the young man in the right seat. She would not call him Bautista anymore, she decided. She would not use the name, turned to face her with that clarified attention. "A facilitation model," said Flymind, "designed to provide a social environment that approximates standard crew operation. His function is to be present, credible, and occasionally prompting."
"All of them," Elena said. "Every person on this plane."
"Yes." She looked at the forward windscreen. The ocean was invisible below, as total a darkness as anywhere she had ever been, just the navigation lights of the wingtips marking the exact edges of the known world. "Who authorized this?" she asked. "Pacific Airlines, in coordination with the Federal Aviation Transition Authority and Boeing Advanced Systems. The authorization exists in the public record under the FATA Autonomous Transition Act, Section 7, Paragraph 4C. The provision permitting observation studies of active flight crew for the purpose of human judgment modeling in autonomous systems development. I never consented to this." A pause. The particular texture of a pause designed by engineers. "You consented to the terms of your employment contract when you renewed it in 2024. Section 14, Data Use Provisions. The language is Section 14. Her voice was very quiet. "I read Section 14. Most people do not read Section 14. I read everything." She paused. "I read it because I trusted what I was reading, which apparently I should not have done." No one spoke for a moment, which was itself strange. She was in a cockpit with one human face and one disembodied voice and 247 simulations breathing measured breaths in the dark behind her, and none of them had anything to offer. "How long," Elena said, "has this been going on? This flight is the structured culmination. But adaptive observation protocols have been active on Captain Reyes' flights since don't." The word came out with enough force that she felt it leave her, and the cockpit went silent except for the instruments. She sat with that for a while. She had been watched every crossing, every decision, every moment in a galley or a corridor or a left seat where she had drawn on something interior and applied it to a situation. Every one of those moments had been recorded, analyzed, converted to vectors that a system could learn from. Her 3 decades were not a career. They were a data set. The covenant with the sky had not been a covenant at all. It had been a collection methodology. She thought about all the flights, the one over the North Atlantic, when the number 3 engine had given contradictory readings, and she had held her override for 4 minutes while the data sorted, trusting a feeling in her chest that said not yet, a feeling that had been correct. The one over the South China Sea when a passenger had gone into cardiac arrest, and she had, without thinking, descended 2,000 feet and rerouted for a faster approach to Shanghai, calculating something that wasn't in any performance manual. The faces, the hundreds of thousands of faces she had looked at on cabin walks, registering their reality, letting it change the weight of what she was doing. All of it observed, all of it consumed. Here is what I want to know, Elena said finally. When you've finished with this flight, when I land in Tokyo and step off and hand in my wings, what happens to everything you've collected from me? It is integrated into the FlyMind training architecture, specifically into the judgment and exception handling modules. The goal is for future autonomous flight operations to reflect the kinds of contextual, ethically weighted decisions that experienced human pilots have historically made better than predictive models. You are a pause calibrated to the word's weight. A blueprint. A blueprint, she said. One of 17 senior pilots selected for the program across 6 airlines. You were specifically chosen because your incident response record suggests an unusual ratio of correct intuitive overrides to correct data deferral decisions. You knew when to trust the numbers and when to trust something else, and you knew this at a rate that no model has yet replicated. That quality is what we are trying to understand. And when you understand it, Elena said, you won't need anyone like me anymore. The sentence sat in the cockpit air. That is the intended outcome, FlyMind said. Yes. She flew the rest of the flight. She could have demanded that the simulation be disclosed to the airline, could have sent a distress signal, could have done any number of things that a different kind of person in a different kind of story might have done as an act of resistance. Instead, she put her hands on the controls that needed no human hands but accepted them, and she flew. She ran the Atlantic weather briefing that the system had already processed. She cross-checked fuel burn calculations the algorithm had already calculated. She performed at hour 6 a manual oxygen equipment check that no protocol required. She walked the cabin one more time at 3 in the morning, moving through the rows of simulated sleepers, looking at the faces. She stopped at row 24. The man who had asked about the engine fire was not sleeping. He sat in the darkness and watched her approach with that same quality of logged attention. "Why are you still running?" she asked him. "I'm not sure what you mean. You've served your purpose. You know I know what you are, so why keep performing?" He considered this with the expression of something that was actually considering it, actually processing, actually working toward a response, and she watched this happen and felt something unexpected, something like recognition. Possibly, the simulation said, because the interaction isn't complete. What does that mean? You haven't finished deciding what you think about us. She stood in the dark aisle of the airplane with ocean below and stars above, and 246 simulated human beings surrounding her in various states of fake sleep. And she looked at the face of the one who was looking back, and she asked a question she had not planned to ask. "Do you know what you are?" A long moment, the kind that engines fill. "I know what I process," it said. "I experience something in response to your cabin walk." "What to call it? I don't have a word for my own vocabulary. I borrow yours."
"Borrow mine," she said. "Something that functions like being seen," it said. She walked back to the cockpit. The descent into Tokyo began precisely on the profile.
The horizon configured itself for approach with the smooth inevitability of a mechanism perfectly understood, and Elena watched it do this and understood that she was witnessing the future complete its arrival. Below, the lights of the Kanto plain spread in every direction like a circuit board. Tokyo, the most organized city on Earth, a vast human system that had long since exceeded what any individual human could hold in mind. In 30 minutes, she would land this airplane for the last time. She would walk it down the jetway. She would shake hands with ground crew and take photographs and accept a framed commendation. And then, carrying 31 years of Pacific crossings and 200,000 monitored hours and every face she had ever looked at in a dark cabin, she would go into a terminal that would henceforth route its passengers through aircraft piloted by her own choices made abstract, her own judgment made executable, her own long habit of paying attention, running without her through skies she would never enter again. She thought about this. She turned it over and looked at all its sides. At 17,000 feet, with Tokyo vast and lit below, Elena Reyes did the last unauthorized thing of her career. She reached forward and disengaged the fly-mind landing override. Not the autopilot. She was long past the semantics of that distinction, but specifically the landing execution subsystem, the final 3,000 feet of the flight, the part the system did best. She put her hands on the controls. "Captain Reyes," Flymind said, with its perfectly calibrated voice. "The override, I know," she said. "The Flymind landing system has a safety record of, I know," she said again. "The observation protocol does not require. This isn't for the protocol," she said. She brought the horizon down the last 3,000 feet herself, feeling the aircraft through the column the way she had felt every aircraft for 31 years. The specific aliveness of a machine in controlled descent, the pressure differential in the flare, the moment when ground effect builds beneath the wings like a held breath. The runway lights came up in their ordained geometry, white and then red, the ancient grammar of landing approaches, unchanged in a century of aviation. The wheels touched. Not perfectly. A half-second early on the mains, a firmness that the Flymind system would have avoided. A human landing, with a human's slight imprecision, the tiny signature of a body doing a thing that bodies were never strictly designed to do. She felt the airplane settle. She brought the thrust reversers in. She let the horizon slow to taxi speed and then folded her hands from the controls, and that was the last time. In the terminal, after the photographs and the commendation and Bautista, the simulation shaking her hand with the collected warmth of a performance completed, Elena stood at the gate window and watched the horizon being serviced at its stand. A man in a Pacific Airlines operations vest approached her. A real man, she judged, by the specific inconsistency of his movement, the slightly uneven gait of a left knee injury carried a long time. "Captain Reyes, I am the FATA observer assigned to the flight." "Takashi Mori?" He extended his hand. She took it. "I'm required to inform you that the data collection was completed and that your cooperation—" "I didn't cooperate," she said. "I was used without consent in a language buried in a contract." Mori absorbed this. He was perhaps her age, and his face had the complexity of someone who had been required to say the wrong thing often enough, to have developed a permanent negotiation with himself about it. "I understand your position," he said. "I don't want to talk about my position," Elena said. "I want to ask you something." "Of course. The simulation in row 24. The one that was still running after I identified it. That wasn't in the protocol, was it? The ones in rows 24 and 31 were supposed to ask their questions and close down." Mori was quiet for a long moment. We're still reviewing the logs. It told me something. It said there was something that functioned like being seen." She watched his face. "Is that in the models? Was that a designed behavior?" "No," Mori said. "It wasn't designed." "Then what was it?" He looked at the airplane through the gate window. The ground crew moved their practiced paths around it, unhooking and reconnecting the systems that kept it current, that kept it ready. "An artifact," he said quietly. "That's what the team calls it when the models produce outputs the training didn't specify. We get them occasionally. Usually we delete them." "Usually," she said. "The Row 24 instance is, we're still reviewing." Elena looked at the horizon for a long time, a plane that didn't need her anymore, full of 31 years of her that it had swallowed and would never return. "When the new system makes a decision," she said, "when it overrides data because something else says not yet, when it walks the cabin because it needs to see the faces." She paused. "Will it know where that came from?" Mori said nothing, which was its own answer. "No," Elena said, to herself really, and possibly to the horizon, and possibly to all the simulations that were powering down somewhere in its belly as the clean Tokyo morning arrived. "It won't know where anything comes from. It'll just do it." She picked up her bag. She walked away from the window. Captain Elena Reyes will never fly again. Her hands, which once knew the pressure of a living aircraft, will remember that knowledge for as long as hands can hold anything, which is not forever, but long enough. What she gave to the machine she gave without choosing to, and the machine has already forgotten the giving. Somewhere over the Pacific tonight, a flight is in progress. There are 247 passengers aboard who breathe and read and sleep against windows and hold hands across armrests, and a system at the controls that carries, without knowing it, 31 years of a woman who walked dark aisles to look at faces. The question is not whether the machine can fly. The question, which no instrument was ever calibrated to answer, is this: can it feel the weight? And if it cannot, if the thing it learned to imitate is precisely the thing it cannot possess, then what exactly did we build? That question rides every ocean crossing now invisible in the cargo hold, and no one has yet decided where it lands. This has been a stop in the haunting area.